Hi, in the previous tutorials we looked at using while loops and do while loops, and those two loops we were able to use test conditions. So we could ask a question, and while the test condition was while it evaluated to true, it would run blocks of code or instructions that we set. Okay, in one of those examples we used a counter, so we'd have a counter variable that was initialized, and then the loop would run, and for each iteration of the loop it would increase the counter by 1. So say if the condition was that the counter had to be less than 10, then it wouldn't run the loop more than 10 times. So we used a counter in a while loop, but today we're going to use for loops, and a for loop can also use a counter, but it's much more useful than that. It's got a lot of really good uses, and it's something that every programmer uses at some point. So especially with working with arrays and string operations and that kind of thing. So we'll get to that a little bit later, but basically a for loop in JavaScript has 3 different parts. So we've got a for keyword here, and then inside the brackets there's 3 different parts. All right. The first bit here is we're initializing this I to a value of 1. Now I is kind of like a variable, and we could call it whatever we want. We could use a different letter, we could use a word, but it's kind of being used as a temporary variable in this loop. So I is initialized to 1, and then we've got this condition here, I is less than 10, and that's the loop's test condition. So while I is less than 10, this loop will run, and then for each iteration of the loop, or every time the loop runs, I will increment, or it will increase by 1. Okay? Inside the curly braces, that's where the code goes that we want to run inside this loop. And the code that's going to run is on line 17. So basically it will print a message to the screen saying this is line, and then it will concatenate or join the value of I at the end of that sentence. So in the first loop iteration it will say this is line 1. In the second iteration it will say this is line 2. The third iteration will say this is line 3, and so on. And because we've got the break tag here, it will add a new line for each iteration. Okay, so basically we've set I to 1. The condition is that it will run the loop while I is less than 10, and then for every iteration of the loop, at the end of running that loop, it will increase the value of I by 1. Now, if we test this, will it say this is line 1, this is line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5, line 6, and so on? Will it, at the end, the last iteration, will it say this is line 10? Let's see, because we want it to run 10 times. So no, it doesn't. It says this is line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9. If we go back and have a look at the code, you can see that the test condition here is while I is less than 10. So if we want it to have or go all the way up to 10, then we need to change this to 11, because we need to remember that I is set to 1 and not 0. Okay, so if we save that and run it again, it goes all the way up to 10 now. Okay, so that is how to use a basic for loop to act to basically run code, run a block of code or instructions a set number of times. So you can use this as like a counter to run a loop 10 times, run that code 10 times, and then continue on with the rest of the program. In the next tutorial, we're going to have a look at how to use a for loop to loop through an array, loop through every element in an array, and how to loop through every character in a string. And that will be quite useful. Okay, so that's in the next tutorial. Thanks for watching. Have a go at using a for loop in JavaScript, and keep an eye out for the next tutorial.